Well, hi everybody, and welcome to this class on 6 ways to customize drag and drop interactions in Storyline 360. So let me just take 30 seconds real quick, tell you what this class is about, and then we're just gonna jump right into the first lesson. And what this class is about is this. Storyline's drag and drop features out of the box are amazing, right? Using the built-in freeform options, you can do just about anything you want or can imagine without having to add any extra triggers or conditions or anything. But what makes the drag and drop question so powerful in Storyline is how you can extend what's already possible. You can customize how the objects are dropped visually, what happens. You can animate those drag objects. You can add variables to create custom counters, feedback scores, and even set up an infinite number of drag items using a single object. Oh yeah, that's right, you heard me correct. But I'm going to save that one for a little later in the class. For now, let's just dive into the first and perhaps most important way that you can customize your drag and drop interactions in Storyline. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, if there's only one lesson that you watch in this class, it's gotta be this one. And don't get me wrong, the other ones are fantastic. They're super creative. But this one, well, it's a built-in feature that a whopping 98% of Storyline users tend to either overlook or don't even know about in the drag and drops. And I'm talking about here the drop correct and drop incorrect states. These are built-in states that are designed to provide visual feedback for your learners, and it's all automatic. You don't need any triggers or anything else. It's all built in. So let me go ahead and show you how that works. Okay, so I'm starting here in the welcome screen. And you know what I'm gonna do real quick? Before we build this, I'm gonna import a PowerPoint. Thought about doing that. It's one of the best ways to quickly kickstart your projects if you have the graphics already set up in a PowerPoint file. So I have that here. So I'm just going to import a PowerPoint file. And I've got that here on my project file. So I'll bring this in. What Storyline's going to do is look at all of the slides. It's only a single slide for me, but it's going to look at all the slides, all the information, the text, the designs, so it's templates, placeholders, colors, and fonts. And it's going to bring that all in for my project. So you can see I have one project file right here, and I'll keep that in the current scene that we're in. Well, we don't really have a scene yet, so this one, it's not going to matter. But what's nice is all of the graphics will be editable, not edible, and I can bring those in and then work from those directly in Storyline. So that's going to be a big help for getting this started. So give me a second here, or give Storyline a second here to bring this in. Okay, and so here's our project file. It's already set up. If I double click the slide to look at it, you can see I've got everything already here. I've got my objects, I've got my drop notes, targets, and so I can change the text on all of these. Looks a little small here. Sometimes that happens because PowerPoint being a print-based application might make it just a little bit larger. And what are my default themes? Calibri, right? And this is just text right there. And I can also change the colors. If I look at the Format tab, you can see the fill. There we go, right? And we know that this is tied to our design colors, our theme colors, because I can see the little red outline right here on accent 4, indicating that this is indeed a part of the current theme. So if I didn't see anything highlighted, then I would know that that color had been hard-coded or just picked with the eyedropper and locked in. But I can change that by going to the design tab, and then I can come over to colors, and then I can just start moving these around and notice how all the colors are updating. Doesn't mean they're always going to be right, but it means that these are editable, and with a single click I can make those changes. All right, so what I'm going to do real quick just to make this set up is I'm going to label these items real quick. So this is a trash can, so this is a drop target, it's drop, and I'll call it trash, and the next one would be drop keep file cabinet, right? So it's a sorting activity. So we'll set this up, and these are my drag objects here. So here's what I can do real quick. I'm just going to say drag -0, and I'm going to hit return. So what I want is I want this. Let me just make sure I can see that. I just want that prefix, because once I copy, then I can come into each one of these quickly and just add a 1. Next one I can double click and add a paste, and then a 2, and then double click, and then a 3. So it's a fast way to rename each of these objects without having to type it out each time, because sometimes typing and talking is tough. So I think that's all set up. I don't need my instructions, and the rest of that looks really good. All right, and let's just save this real quick. So Control S just to save, and I'll save it to the desktop to make that easier. So drag and drop sorting, and this would be our states. Okay, so we have our file set up. Let's go ahead and convert this to a drag and drop interaction. We do that from coming up here to the Insert tab, and we just want to get that in. Whoa, what happened there? Insert tab and convert to freeform. So the second option right here. And so we're going to choose drag and drop. The Storyline is going to convert this to a custom drag and drop interaction for us that we can then really use any custom layout that we like. So quickly, I'm just going to select all of my drag items. And because I added that prefix there for the drag, makes it really easy to find each of these. So I'm just going to go through here, drag 1, 2, 3, and so on, right? Just to knock them out. And then what we can say is, let's just say the first 3 will be the drag keep. And then the last 3, the second batch, will be the drag trash. So the first ones will be keep. And I'm just obviously randomizing that. So 1, 2, and 3 will be objects that go onto the file cabinet. And then 4, 5, and 6 will go to the trash. All right. And with that, I'm going to click back to my slide. And you can see Storyline automatically set up some incorrect feedback for us. Okay, so at this point, we're ready to take a look at the interaction. And then we'll look at our first tip, and that is to customize those feedback states for the drag, the drop correct, and drop incorrect. So let's just take a look and see how this looks. But super fast, right? How fast we can put this together from a drag and drop interaction. So now these objects are all draggable. I can drop them on each of the targets. And of course, the stacking right here, the way these are stacked can all be customized. Click submit, and then there's my feedback. All right. So let's look at this tip. This is one of the most missed areas in working with states, especially drag and drops, and that is we can provide visual feedback to the learner to let them know before they click submit how they did on their interaction. So if you look at this first object, the note 1, I'm going to come down here to the states panel, and we'll pop that open. So we just have the normal state. So what I want to do is add 2 states to show how the object is dropped, whether it's on a correct target or the incorrect target. So we're going to use some visual feedback for that to help indicate. So I'm going to click Edit States, and we'll add a new state, and we're going to choose a built-in. So we're not going to give it a custom name, right? We're not going to create our own state. We're just going to come down here, and we'll choose the drop correct and drop incorrect. So what these will do is when the object is dropped on either a correct or incorrect target, the object can change its appearance. That's what states are for, right? Controlling how that object looks. So we'll say drop correct, add, and then we'll just make that simple. Let's see here. Drop correct, we'll say that's a green. And then for drop incorrect, so second state, this time we're going to use the incorrect. Click add, and then we'll just use the red. All right, I'm just going to say this real quick. I'm just using color right here to indicate the feedback. Color alone typically is not recommended for accessibility concerns, right? So you want to have more than just color alone. We could add a different text. We could change the text. We could add icons, something else in here to make this more visible, because the color alone may not be enough for some learners. But I'm just going to use that for the purpose of the demo. But I just wanted to keep that in mind real quick. All right, so click done. And then to speed up our process, I'm going to use the format painter to quickly apply those changes. So home, and I'm going to double click the format painter. So by double clicking this, it's going to remain persistent, meaning that I can apply those properties from this first object to multiple objects. So click, look at that. Note 2, note 3, note 6, 5, and 4. All right, so they all have those states. That was super quick. I'm just going to click away to deselect. Okay. And so everything still looks the same here, but we have these new states here to show how it's going to work. So if I preview this is your little internal test right here. Is this going to work? Will we see those states? So if you know how this is going to work right now, then you already know most of this tip. If you don't, then here's how it works. I drop it on. Hey, wait a minute. Where is that visual feedback? I thought we were supposed to help the learner get to the correct answer. Well, the way it's set up by default is when I press or tap submit, now we'll see those color changes. But the way this feedback slide is appearing with that faded background, it's kind of hard to tell. We're kind of covering it up with the feedback modal. Instead, what we want to do is provide learners that guidance or that hint up front so they can consider their choices and then decide if they want to move on. So I'm going to go in here, and what am I going to do? I am going to go to my design tab for the question tools. So up here on the ribbon, and then over here under drag and drop options, this is where we can control how and when that feedback is applied. So look down here at the very bottom. Here's what we have: feedback, delay item drop states until interaction is submitted. We're just going to turn that off, and we'll click OK. Okay. So now when we preview, we'll see each of those change. So we drop one on, there's the red, drop it on over there, and there's the green. And so, we're not trying to trick our learner all the time. We're just trying to help them get to that correct answer, right? If they move it back and forth, they can see the red and say, okay, maybe I need to come there, and so on. So it's just a way to provide that feedback up front to the learner to help guide them to making the correct choice rather than, possibly just trying to set them up so they miss the answer or just without any assistance. All right, so a couple things, though, real quick, just because it's worth mentioning this as well. I notice over here in the slide triggers, probably should have said this when we first imported that PowerPoint, and that is when you import PowerPoints, typically the way the triggers or actions are set up in PowerPoint is to jump to the next slide when the slide ends. So you don't want your slide doing this. So when the timeline ends on this slide, jump to the next slide. I'm going to delete that trigger. You don't need that because we're submitting the interaction. So just look for those when you import your PowerPoint files. And then finally, we also can change how these objects are dropped on each of the targets. So that comes up a lot. So if I right-click this object right here, we can see that there's a drag and drop option, and then there's the option for snap to center or free and how all of these objects work. So we can change these objects like this by selecting them to free and also do the same one. So what does that mean right here then? It means that when the object is dropped on a target, it can just touch a part of that target. It doesn't have to be in that center part of the object. So you can see now it's off to the side. And as long as part of it's touching, right, then it's going to work. So you can see just there's that little corner right there. That's part of it. So that's another option you have for working with those targets. Lastly, what happens if the object gets dropped back up top? So this is going to be just a little bit of a bonus tip. I like to show this as well. It's not totally part of the state changes, but if you have the object, say, returning back to the top or the learner moves them off to the side away from a target, it's indicating that they're correct, but the learner may know that, right? If they're resetting these objects back up here or they just nudge one of them, they all look like they're incorrect. So here's a workaround around that. And again, maybe this doesn't apply to the way you're working with drag and drops, but I've seen this happen before, so I think it's worth just mentioning it. Let's do a quick save here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a hotspot. I love the hotspot. Just a hotspot is this big invisible button that you can use. No, not an input, a hotspot. So I'll use the rectangle hotspot, and I'm just going to drag this big hotspot all over here across the top area. And I'm just going to call this one hotspot reset. And so what I want to do is reset that objects that are dropped or removed back up here to this top area. So I'm going to bring this all the way to the bottom just so it's out of the way. And what they get to do with hotspots is if I right click this hotspot, notice how it says show the hand cursor. So I want to disable that. I don't want to show that hand cursor when they mouse over. So actually, I'll just preview that real quick. So what the hand cursor is going to do is just going to show that it's an active button. So it thinks that maybe you want to click on top of it. Did I move it below things? Or did I already take it off? Let me preview that one more time. So I didn't see the hand cursor, but I would expect to have seen it. Interesting. It's not showing. So maybe there is something going on. But what I'm going to do still is delete that or deselect that. So don't show that hand on hover. And so what I want to do is just reset these back to the normal state whenever the objects are dropped on this hotspot. So here's how this looks. We'll say a new trigger. And so what is it we want to do? And when do we want to do it? We want to change the state of, we'll say this first note card. So we'll say change the state of drag one. And you can see, again, just to reinforce this, the benefit of using that common prefix when you're working with similar objects. So these are all of my drag objects, and I have my two drop keeps together. So change the drag one to normal, and then we'll say when the object is dropped on that hotspot. So we'll say object is dropped on, and the object being the drag one is dropped on a hotspot reset. So that should reset it. We'll click OK. And what's nice here is that we can select this trigger and then choose copy trigger. So we have that option to copy what we just added. So we'll say copy it. And then I'm going to shift click these remaining 5 objects to multi-select them so they're all selected together. Head back over to my triggers, and then I can just press the paste those triggers right there. So that's going to add that same trigger for each of them, and it also applies to each of the individual cards. So it's changing drag 3, it's changing drag 6. All right, let's preview this one more time and see how this looks. So here's my note. If I move it around, okay, so last thing I need to change is it's now centering everything in here on the hotspot, because the hotspot also has its own drag properties as well. So it didn't change the card, but I do need to right-click this hotspot, and I'm going to choose now drag and drop, and I'm going to say free. So it's snapping everything directly to the center, say free, and now we move it up. And so I like walking through these steps. I've done this a bunch, but I like how each fix sort of sometimes introduces a new issue, and it's an issue only because of how each of these properties works. So the more we can, know our tools, the more we can work with them, the better we're going to be, and we'll be able to kind of adjust to these different workarounds. But here we have it, right? So we're dropping these targets right here on that hotspot, and it's keeping these all set to the normal. And then, of course, when I start to bring them down here, I can get that feedback and see how that looks. But if I bring them back, it resets everything to the normal. So if I were to submit the interaction, right, it's still going to be incorrect, but it doesn't show me that visual feedback that says, yeah, this is incorrect, because in a sense, you're not really placing them here. You know that the targets are down here on the bottom. And there you have it, my friends, plain and simple. Just a quick reminder, though, if you want that feedback to be instantaneous, make sure to uncheck that delay feedback option. Oh, and here's a pro tip. When you're using colors to signal correct or incorrect, be sure to throw in some extra visual cues like text labels, icons, patterns, shapes. It's just not about looking good visually, but you also want to ensure accessibility for all of your learners. And in today's world, that's more crucial than ever. All right, I hope you found this tip super helpful and see how it'll be hopefully a great addition to your e-learning bag of tricks the next time you're working with Storyline's drag and drop interactions. All right, so this next one is kind of 2 tips in one, because I'm going to show you how you can extend what happens when learners drop an object on a correct or incorrect target. So we're going to look at animating those objects out as they're dropped on either target. But to do this, I'm going to have to show you a few things about the timeline and how to control those exit animations. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in and see how this all comes together. Okay, starting with a drag and drop interaction. I'm just going to preview this real quick so you can see how this is working. There's nothing really added to it. It's just a simple convert to freeform slide where we have these notes and we drop them onto one of the targets. Now I have enabled the drop correct and incorrect states so we get that visual feedback. We can choose to keep that or not. But what I want to do is I want to animate the cards as they're dropped out. I want to have an exit animation applied so they kind of spin or fade or scrunch or do shrink, do something like that. So we can do that by selecting the graphics. I could select all of them if I want to play this all at once, which is super fast. Then head on up here to the ribbon, and under the animations tab, I don't want an entrance animation. I mean, I guess I could, right? That's easy to do. But what I want to do is work with an exit animation. So let's do the spin and shrink, I think is nice. And shrink and turn, yeah, spin and shrink. So it'll kind of like spin and get smaller as it's dropped on each target. So that's what I want to have happen. Now, the way this works, though, the way exit animations work is they're fired based on the timeline, right? So an entrance animation is going to apply as soon as the slide loads, the timeline begins, and the exit is going to kick in right here at the end. So if I were to leave this as it is, then after 5 seconds, or really I guess 4 seconds, it'll last 4 seconds, these are all going to fade out or spin out because the timeline's going to end, right? So if I preview it, that's not what we want. We obviously want the animation to hold, right? To pause that animation and only trigger that animation when the objects are dropped on a target. So after 5 seconds, there they go. That's not what we want. So what we need to do is something really simple. We just need to pause the timeline. So you need to pause the timeline anytime before those exit animations kick in. So I can come to 3 seconds right here. And if that's where I want to pause, I have a couple options. I can add a trigger to say pause timeline when it reaches 3 seconds, or I can add what's called a cue point. Now the cue points, I think, are a little bit more flexible in a lot of cases because you can tie the trigger to the cue point, and then you can move the cue point around the timeline if you need to fine tune it. It's a little bit easier than having to change the time code. So what I'll do is I'm just going to put my cursor playhead right here at the 3 second mark, and then I'm going to press the C as in Charlie, on the keyboard. And so you can see right there, I've added a cue point, and I can move it around if I felt like I needed some more fine tuning. So what I'll do is we'll add a trigger, a timeline trigger that pauses our timeline when the timeline reaches that cue point. And that'll prevent the timeline from reaching the end and firing those exit animations. So we just add a trigger over here in the triggers panel. What is it I want to do? I want to pause the timeline. So down here under pause timeline, we'll just pause it, and we'll say pause the timeline on the slide when the timeline reaches. So it's a timeline event. So down here at the very bottom, we'll say timeline event reaches, and then we say cue point. So the benefit right here is you can see the time is 2.64 seconds. If I needed to fine tune that, I don't want to come in here and have to change that time code, right? So I have to come in here and always modify the time in seconds. By using the cue point, a lot more control. So if I move that cue point back and forth, Storyline's automatically going to read that time code anyway. Okay, so that solves the timeline part. What I want to do is, actually, let's do this real quick. I'm going to turn on my player, and I just want to add my seek bar so we can see how that pauses. So we might not show the seek bar to the learners for this, but this will just help us see that it pauses. Okay, so at this point, it's set up, but we need to now tell Storyline to fire those animations. So I'm going to preview this real quick and show you. So we won't see the animations automatically apply, but now we need to tell Storyline when to make those move, right? So we can see that I'm dropping them on here, but there's no exit animation because the timeline hasn't ended. And the way we do that is with a trigger that changes the state of the object from its normal state to a hidden state. So by changing it to a hidden state, actually the timeline of the object is going to apply, and before it'll hide, it's going to play that animation. So I'll do it for the first one and show you how that works. So we'll say change the state of that drag one, note one, to, we'll say hidden. And hidden is a built-in state. It doesn't mean it deletes the object, it just means it's not visible. So we could still change it back to, in the other state. And we'll say when the user drops all the way at the bottom here, when the object is dropped on, when the drag one is dropped on, and the target would be either the keep or the trash. I can do both right here. So it doesn't matter which object, I'll click OK, which object this note card is dropped on. Once it's dropped on either of those, that animation should fire. So let's take a look and see how that works. All right, so the timeline's going to pause. We should see that down here. And then I'll take my note card and drop it on the trash. And there we go. You can even play a sound effect if you want, like a fading sound. That's pretty neat, right? Now, in this case, we have these drop correct and incorrect states set up. You may not want that just because you're not really getting to appreciate that. You can't really see it as it disappears. Let me try that one more time. So maybe that doesn't make as much sense, but it just depends on how you want to set that up. So I'll put it over here, and there it is correct. There it is correct, and it goes away. All right, and then of course, with all animations, right, we can adjust the duration. We can choose which way. Well, each animation is going to have its own options, but you can see how to make those changes here. And of course, if I want the duration to be a little bit quicker, I can do that. All right, so with that, I'm going to select the trigger we just added to that first note card. So just select it over here under Object Triggers, And let's duplicate that or copy that trigger. I'm going to copy it to the clipboard, and then I'm going to select these remaining objects so I can paste it all at once. So with those objects selected, I'm going to click the little clipboard right here and paste that trigger. And notice how this is a self-referencing trigger, which means I don't have to update the target or the object. By pasting it on each of the objects, you can see Storyline recognizes that when its drag 2 is dropped on either of those, change the drag 2 to hidden, same with drag 3 and so on. So I don't have to come in here and make those individual changes. Okay, so let's preview that. Here we go. So it won't matter which one we do. There we go. I can see I'm getting some of these correct, some of them incorrect, and so on. Now, here's just an idea for this. I really like this because this is a fun way to make things, and of course we have to submit too, right? Make things work is once all of these have been dropped on the targets and they're disappeared, we could resume the timeline. So we'd do this. We'd say trigger, and we'll say resume timeline, resume the timeline, and on this slide, when, and we'll say the state of drag 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. When all 6 of our drag objects, when all of them are hidden, right? Because we're changing those states to hidden. So then the timeline will resume. Now, the thing I was going to say about this, though, I think in a lot of ways, maybe this works best when you only apply it to the correct choices and not the incorrects. Meaning, if you do the incorrect and it goes away, that's kind of quick. There's our resume, and then we could have this actually auto submit too. Let me show you that. But I think it might make more sense just to have these the ones that are correct go away, but then keep the incorrect choices, just so the learner has time to reflect on those and then move them back and forth. And so I mentioned the submit button. Since these are all disappearing, there isn't as clear a way to automatically submit the interaction. We still have the submit button on the player, but it might not seem as intuitive. So we could do something like having a layer or a little tooltip come up here and say, don't forget to submit. Or we could just do this automatically for the learner, right? We can have the timeline resume, and then when the timeline ends, submit the interaction for the learner. So we would just do this. We have it down here, the submit button. So submit interaction, not when user clicks, but we could say when the timeline ends, something like that on this slide. Then it's going to submit, and then the learner is free to move on. So that's how we could do that. And again, if you're not changing the state, if you're not having the incorrects fly out, then the timeline's not going to resume because we have that set up to only resume after all of them are submitted. So there goes my timeline and incorrect. So an idea, a way to add a little dynamic motion to your objects, but I think it's a fun one and it's an easy one because you already have, your interaction set up. You don't have to build something entirely new, but it's just a little different way to add some motion to your interactions. And there you have it, a nifty way to infuse some dynamic motion into your drag and drop interactions. Real quick before we wrap things up, I just want to leave you with a couple of parting thoughts on using the technique. First off, you might want to reserve the effect primarily for the correct choices only. Not using it with the incorrect choices means it gives learners just a better chance to reflect on why they might have made those choices or chosen incorrectly because the choice isn't disappearing right away, right? So but just some food for thought. Regardless of your choice, remember that most important is the exit animations are set to trigger when that timeline reaches the end. So to ensure that your choices don't vanish all at once, just be sure to add that trigger to pause the timeline, whether you're using it based on time or a cue point. Either way, just make sure it's there so the timeline pauses just before the end. Ever found yourself in the situation where you want to test learners on their ability to identify a correct sequence or an order of steps in something? Like assembling a product or conducting a scientific experiment or maybe even just following a recipe. Well, drag and drops obviously are the way to go, but you want to provide detailed feedback for each drag item after it's dropped along the way. So you want the learners to pause and reflect and understand why their choices, their drop choices, were correct or incorrect, or mostly incorrect, right? It's probably where you want to provide most of the feedback. Well, here's the kicker. By default, drag and drop questions only provide feedback for the entire interaction. It's either all correct or incorrect. And most of the time, that's good enough for what you're doing. But what if you want to take it a step further? What if you want to or you need to provide specific feedback for each item so your learners can truly grasp the nuances of their choices? So it might seem a little like a head scratcher at first, but trust me, it's easier than you think. So take a look at the screen I'm using here. Look at the screen. I'm using a content library template. So let me preview this real quick. You can see we have 10 drag items and 7 targets, but we're asked to put these in order. So I'm just going to preview this real quick, walk through it, right? So we have the steps and we can drag any one at any point. So we're not getting any feedback specifically for each of these steps. Now we could add some drop correct and drop incorrect states for this type of interaction. That would make sense here, but we want to provide more feedback than just that visual feedback. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click escape and I'm just going to duplicate this slide. So this will be the start slide. Duplicate it, right click, duplicate, and then let's just call this one original. That should update the title. Awesome. Okay, so this is our first one. So what we want to do, and not have to add a lot of triggers or any variables here, we're going to keep this really simple. I'm going to remove the try again feedback. I think that doesn't make sense here because we're going to provide feedback on each choice. So what we'll do is we'll come to the design tab and I'm just going to change the attempts right here from 2 to 1. So that gets rid of that try again layer. Bye-bye. But what I want to do is disable each of these remaining drop targets. I just want to ask the learner what is the first step of this process. So I don't want to ask about the second and third and the other steps. So I'm going to select each of these and I'm just going to gray them out. I want to make these more obvious that they're not active targets. So what color is this? If I use format, where's that coming from? Do I see that? Can't be a custom. Oh, there it is. So it's right down there. So let's just do this. I'll select that shape and I'm going to grab home, double click format painter, and I'm just going to select each of these real quick. Okay. So they're still active actually. A couple things I could do. I could delete them, right? Remove the target altogether, but I want to keep it. So I'm going to pop into form view and I'm just going to remove the available targets. So they're not, I'm just going to remove them so they're not even an option. So I'll say none, none. And so what'll happen here is if the learner tries to drop one of those drag objects on top of the rectangle, it's going to treat it like anything else or nothing else, meaning there's no active target there. I just want to focus on that first target. So go back to slide view, and there we have it. So preview the slide now, and so all of my drag items are still available, right? Because they were part of the original interaction, but these targets down here are not. So I could choose step 1, any one of these, and then click submit, and then, okay, I got it correct. But let's say I got it incorrect. Here's where I can provide more specific feedback. So maybe we don't call this incorrect. We change the text in here, but we're going to provide hints or clues to the learner to guide them in recognizing what that first step of the process was. Now, you could still use the attempts, right? We could have multiple attempts, in which case, if we use the multiple attempts, okay, that's funny. That is old. That we should try again, but look at that old. I haven't seen that in a long time, but there's a try again. So you could use a try again, and we could maybe make this a little bit more informative or helpful to the learner to help guide them. And then ultimately, if they still get it wrong, they go to incorrect, and then they jump to the next slide. So here's how that process is going to work. So this would be step 1, right? So we could just say 01, step 1. What's the first step? And then I'm going to duplicate this. So I'm going to duplicate this interaction, say duplicate. And with that duplicated, then we'll just call this one 02. And now I just need to make the updates in the color changes here. So I'm going to select the first one, which is the white color. So we can say home, grab that format painter, and then click on that one. Now, a couple things we could do to make this indicate that this is no longer an option. I like the idea of showing what that step 1 is. So I could copy the formatting from step 1 and then just format paint that first one and then call it step 1 or whatever the actual title would be, right? And then we could take something like step 1 and we want to disable it or fade it out or something, right? So we could say right click, format, and we'll just dial up that transparency. Let's see what 50 looks like. Maybe 80. Okay. Right, so now it's disabled, or at least it's looking disabled, and then we'll say make that just a darker text, something like that. And then what I also need to do is remove this step now from the viable targets. So we have a couple things to do back here in form view. First up is we need to remove the drop target from step 1, and then make step 2 the next drop target. And then we also want to remove this item from a draggable item because the learner's already identified what that first step is. So in form view, let's first remove step 1 as a drag item. So I'm going to come down and just choose none. And then what we'll do for the target is make that now number 2 rectangle. So that's none. And then step 2 goes to the drop target of 2, right? So we just need to make sure these two are aligned. Go back to slide view. And I think that's all we have to do. Let's preview this one and see how that one works. So we're still using the try again. I would probably just see this one's no longer available. All of these are still available, and we just make those choices and figure out what's the correct step. We click OK. Now we get our feedback or our try again. We click it again, and then this would be the actual incorrect that we could then provide. So it seems like a simple solution, right? We don't have to have a bunch of triggers. We just duplicate the slide. And if you're guiding the learner to getting the correct answer, by the time you get to the last slide, which would be the 7th slide, the 7th practice activity, you could use that one as the interaction that gets passed to the LMS, because they can't make it this far until they've answered those steps correctly. Or maybe you have this as a guided activity and then you go back to the original. Maybe you make that one the last one, and that's the final one that they have to do on their own without any of that guidance. So there you have it, my friends, a simple yet powerful way to enhance drag and drop interactions by just spacing out the steps to encourage your learners to slow down, reflect on their choices, and provide some more meaningful feedback for either the correct or the incorrect steps in the process. Now we get to some of the really good stuff, and this is why. Take a look at the drag and drop sorting activity I have here on my screen. Now I've got 4 drop targets and 5 drag objects, and I've set up the correct and incorrect feedback. And guess what? I'm feeling generous today, so I want to give our learners a couple of chances to get it right. A nice guy like that. So to change the number of attempts, all you need to do is head over to the Design tab up here, and under the question tools, we can change that attempts to, let's just say 2. What happens next is pretty neat. Storyline automatically whipped up a try again layer for us, right? You can see that right down here. It's right above the correct and incorrect. Pretty cool, right? But now let's say you want to be even more generous and give learners 3, 4, 5, or heck, even 10 tries. Well, the good news is the process stays essentially the same for the 2 or more attempts. But here's the catch. That try again layer is the only feedback our learners will see until they run out of attempts and the quiz marks them as failed. Now Storyline knows how many attempts are left. It's keeping count behind the scenes, but our learners don't have a clue. So we've got to step in and do that counting ourselves. And to do that, we're going to need a little help from Storyline's number variables to count each and every one of those attempts the learner makes. Now we're not just counting the attempts for the fun of it. We want to show the learners how many tries they've made and how many they've got left. So think of it like a countdown timer, or if you're into games, it's like showing how many lives the player, or in this case, learner, how many they have left. And because we're tracking those attempts, we can actually use that same number variable to dish out some personalized feedback for each and every attempt the learner makes. So it's a fantastic way to move beyond the nope, try again feedback for each attempt. Let me show you how it works. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is create that number variable so we can count the number of attempts. So I'm just going to head over to the variables, and let's just go ahead and create a new one. And we'll just call it counter. That's fine. We could call it attempts or tries, something like that. I'm going to call it counter because it is counting, but we could still label it as a attempt. So I'll show you. So we'll just say number variable, and we'll start by counting up, but we could also count down. But let's just begin this way. So the default value is 0. That makes sense. So counter, I'm going to click OK. And then I want to display that value here because that reference variable, what we call the, to show the value of the variable, we need to show that value to the learner so they know how many tries they've made or how many attempts. So I'm going to insert a text box, and we'll just call this one attempts. And with that, I can put a colon, and then I'm going to insert that variable reference. The variable reference just shows the current value of the variable. So we'll add a value of 1 each time the learner makes a new attempt. So with that blinking just off to the side like that, keep that active. I'm going to come up to the Insert tab again on the ribbon, and this time we're going to choose reference. So reference just means display the value of a variable. So we only have one variable, so that's pretty straightforward. Say counter, and we click OK. So let's do this real quick. Let's just make this larger so it appears okay. So we show 0, and then this will count up 1, 2, 3, or however many attempts we get. And then I'm just going to put my cursor just off to the side of it right here. And I'm going to say out of, and what do we want to do? I want to give 3 attempts. Let's do 4 so we can kind of manage that. And we can always change that up or, more or less later. So yeah, that's fine right there. And so now we need to trigger that variable. We need to adjust it each time the learner makes an attempt. And there's a lot of different ways we can approach this. I think one of the easiest ways is to take advantage of what happens when the learner makes that second attempt. So if we look up in the Design tab, we can see we have attempts at number 10. I'm just going to set that down to 4 because that's what we want to show, the total attempts. So when will they see a second and third attempt? Well, they'll see that on the try again layer. So if I come down to the try again, each time the learner misses one of their tries, they're going to see a try again that says, hey, it's incorrect. Go ahead and try it again. So an easy way to work with this already set up is to add a trigger as a timeline event that adjusts that variable each time this layer begins. So here's what we do. We say new trigger, and I'm going to say adjust variable. So that's our language that we use for working with variables where we want to change the value, but it's also the trigger name, adjust variable. And so we're not going to set the value of the counter to something. Instead, what we're going to do is just add. We're just going to add a value of 1 to the counter when the timeline starts on this layer. Okay? And that's all we need right there. Or we could add it when the learner tries again. I guess it depends on how you want that to work. I think the timeline makes sense, but we could also say when the learner clicks try again, then that's when that'll change. Depends on how you want to show it. Let's preview it real quick. We'll see, and maybe we want to change it back. Change it to the button action. Okay, so I'll go ahead and just drag one of these on here, and we'll click submit. So I can see my first attempt right there. Click try again. I can move it up there or just click it again. Second attempt, try again, and then we will do it one more time. 3 attempts, and I have one more try again. Now, here's my final and last try, right? And I click the submit button, and I can see the incorrect layer is telling me that I've missed it and did not select the correct response, but my attempts still show that I have one more. And so we need to make one little change, and that change is just to add the same trigger that is adding that value to counter. We're just going to copy that. I can right click, or I can choose to copy it from the copy selected trigger button, and I'm going to paste that on incorrect, right? Because what we want to do is just show that that counter is now fully at 4 out of 4 when they get to this layer. So if we wanted to and not have to put it in 2 different places, we could start the default value at 1, right? So as soon as that interaction begins, well, that would be your first attempt. But they really haven't made an attempt yet, right? They haven't clicked submit or attempted it. So I kind of like putting it on the layer. Again, you're putting it in 2 places, but this will be the last layer they see because this is informing them that they missed the interaction. So here we go. Let's just preview this real quick. So just get one on here. I click submit. That's 1 out of 1. Try again. 2 out of 4. Try again. 3 out of 4. Try again. And then this one right here is going to be my final. I still missed it, but it shows me my attempts are full. And we could also do this as a countdown, right? We could, instead of adding, we could subtract a value. So we could say, if we were down here, we could say attempts for, you have 4, and then we just change this value each time, right? So we could say, if you want to do it differently, so that's the easiest way to do it. I'll leave it here, and I'll take that off, and then we're going to say, let's change the default value of our variable. So we'll tell them they get 4 attempts, they have 4, and each time they hit the try again, rather than adding that value, we're just going to say, nope, subtract 1. Sorry, I'm done like that. Subtract a value of 1 from the counter, and then we would just do it right here as well. Subtract a value. So it's going to be the same thing. We're just going to count down, and this time they'll see 0 attempts left rather than the counting up, right? So say 1, submit it, attempts 3, 2, 1, and now we have one last attempt to get it correct. Click it, and now it's back to 0. All right, finally, because we're counting the number of attempts, we've added our own variable so the learner knows how many tries they have based on, right, whatever we set up here for the quiz. Well, we can actually provide specific feedback to help guide them. So because we know how many attempts they're at right there, we can provide hint layers or additional feedback based on the number of attempts. I'll just do this once so we see it, but here's what it looks like. I'll make a new layer, and I'll just call this one hint. And I should have a layout for hint, so I'm just going to apply a different layout here. Hint. Right, and so here's the hint for first attempt, right? Let's say first attempt. Well, if I do a generic, I'm just going to say this is a hint layer. Hint feedback. Then some general guidance. Okay. So what I want to do then is show this after they miss the layer. And maybe it's not the first attempt, it's the second or the third, right? So how do I then show the hint layer to appear rather than the try again? The try again is the default. The try again is automatically going to fire and show based on the attempts that the learner's making. So what we're going to do is we're going to still play off of this try again layer. So let's say when the learner is down to the last attempt, right? We'll give that last attempt, and we'll give them one hint before they lose out. So we'll say we're on the try again layer. We're going to say show layer, and we're just going to quickly show that hint layer when the timeline starts on the layer if, and this is the condition that we're going to need, if the counter is, we could say equal to, I'm just going to say greater than or equal to the value of, well, actually it'd be less than, right? Because we're going to do it less than, if it's less than or equal to a value of 1. So we're going to show that hint value when it's negative, when it's 1, because we're counting down in this case, right? So we're counting down. So if the value is equal to 1, I guess we really don't need the greater than or equal, though. I guess it would still work with equal. Let's try that real quick. So we're saying when the value is equal, show that layer hint real quick, and that'll be our final attempt. So let's preview that and see how that works. So we should see the try again for the first 3 attempts, right? So there's my attempt. There's 1, and 2, and then here we're down to the last attempt. What happened to my button? My button disappeared. So what happened to that? We need to look at that real quick. Where's the button? Oh, there's no trigger, so we say hide layer. Not sure where that went. Hide this layer when user clicks. All right, let's try one more time. Might be an older file that I'm using, but it shouldn't be. Not that old. All right, here we go. Try once, attempt 3, try again, 2, one more time. Okay, I have no idea where that button's disappearing. That's annoying. So I'll make my own button. Sorry about that. We say button, and I'm just going to make a big old button right there. And then we'll say when user clicks the button 2. Right. Got a little messy, but that's okay. So here we go. Countdown. I just want to verify that that hint layer is the last time we see it. So there's 1 because it equals 1. We closed it, and now we get to do one more attempt, and it's incorrect, and it's 0, and you can move on. So we could do things like, I think it'd be easier if we were counting up, but we could have hint for attempt 1. It could be hint 1. I didn't mean to do that. Hint 1, hint 2, and hint 3 to provide specific feedback for each of the attempts the learner makes. We would just add those to the try again. We'd say show hint layer 1 if the value equals 1 attempt, or show hint 2 if the value equals 2, and so on. But once we have that counter, there's a lot of things we can do that go beyond the built-in functionality. All right, that's how you can add your own counters to track the number of tries the learners make. You can count up, you can count down, it doesn't matter how you want to go. Just remember to set the attempts number in the design tab for the quiz options to the same value that you use for your number variable. And if you're looking for a reason to practice this technique, hopefully you are, I've got some recent e-learning challenges on using number variables, and you can find those challenges in the link below. Share an example, and I'll feature your work in the challenge recap post. All right, so if you've been hanging out with me in any of my online classes or training workshops, you've heard me hammering this point home. Learn your tools. The deeper, the more you know your tools, the better you're going to be. Now, the little trick in this example, it's a prime example of what I mean by learn your tools. All right, so take a look at the screen here, and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so if you look at the screen, the interaction really is taking place down here. I've got this network attached storage. We're trying to calculate how much storage this can hold based on the capacities of each of the drives. So you could say, we only need one drive if only one drive goes into each slot. But we actually need up to 4 drives, because what if the learner only has 4 1 terabyte drives, right? So the question is, how do we create multiple versions of this drive without having to duplicate the drive 4, 5, 6, 7 times, or maybe resetting the slide, jumping back to the slide each time it's dropped on to reset the position of the objects. All right, we've got a few different paths we could go down for setting this up, and each one's got its own set of trade-offs to consider. Let's go ahead and take a look at how it works. So here's what we'll do. I'm going to jump into my practice file. And so the idea is, as we drop this on, I'll just put that above, I guess. We want to reset this back to the beginning. And so the easiest way to do this is to work with a motion path. So I'm just going to grab the motion path, and I'll say align. So it's going from here to there, and then we'll say my path options will go from left to right. So we can reset the motion path each time an object is dropped or something else happens. We can say return, right? Reset that path. Or play the animation. So right now, by default, the animation starts on drag cube when the timeline starts. And delete that trigger altogether, and then add a new trigger. And let's say move that motion path. So move the cube along the motion path 1 when the object of the cube, so the object is dropped on. So we're going to say we'll drop that cube on the target. Go ahead and play that animation. All right, so here's the foundation of it. We'll see right here. So preview. It's not going to give us quite what we want, but it's sort of the foundation of getting where we want to be. So nothing's going to play until this is dropped on the target. I drop it on the target, and then there goes the motion path. So the idea is, what if that motion path isn't the default length of 180 pixels, but instead, what if that motion path is only 0 pixels? So that's going to play that motion path. It's going to reset it right here back to the beginning. Now we also would want to change our duration too to the shortest duration we can do, which is 0.10. All right, so now we'll preview this real quick. And now we drag it on, and look at that. There's another one, and another one, and another one. And because we are evaluating what's happening each time this is dropped on the target, we can have a variable. We can have a counter that counts each of the times this is dropped. We can make state changes. So for example, maybe we wanted to show a series of cubes being built up. I can click the States tab right here. You can see I have normal, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So if we wanted to simulate something like that with the cubes being progressively built, we're going to use a counter. So I'll create a new variable, and we'll just call it counter. And we can make that obviously a number variable, and default value is 0. Okay. And let's put that reference here on the slide. So we'll say counter value, and then we'll add our variable reference. So insert tab, and then we want to pop open the reference, add the counter, the variable. And so that's just going to show us at any time what that current value is. And then because we now have that variable, that value, we can make things happen. So we'll say, what is this called? This is called cubes. We say, so the first thing we want to do is just adjust that counter value. So we'll say adjust variable, and then we'll say not set, but we just want to add a value. So we'll say add a value of 1 to the counter each time the user drops the drag cube on the drop target. Okay, so that's all we'll do here to get this going. Now let's preview it once again. So at this point, there's no limitations, no conditions. It's just keep dropping it on the target, right? That oval target. Okay, cool. So now we can evaluate and make things happen based on that current value. And this is really back to storyline sweet spot. So we could say when the variable of counter equals normal, change this to to 0, make it normal, and then when it's 1, make it 1, when it's 2, and 2, and so on. So here we go with that. So now we'll just change the state. So we'll say change the state of our cubes to normal when variable changes of counter if counter equals 0. I mean, we really don't need that since that's where it's starting, but I just like doing that. So now I'm just going to copy it. So copy and then paste a couple times. And then we'll just say cubes to the custom state of 1 when the value is 1. Custom state of 2 when the value is 2. Value 3. I would just go 4. Right. And let's do one more. I don't know if there's that many states, but that's what we have. Okay, so 5, 4, 4, 5, and 5. Okay, let's preview this one. So we're going to count how many times it's dropped, and based on each drop, we'll change the state. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we could say, once it's 6, make this one now hidden, right? So we can say, finally, if we want this to disappear, I didn't do that on the capacity calculator, but we could say, yeah, you know what we'll do? We don't want to keep showing it once it's there. So let's say change the state of our drag cube to hidden, or we could say disabled, right? So that you can't drag it anymore. When the variable changes, counter equals, we could just say equals a value of 6, and then we could do it that way. All right, so 1 and 2, go for the bottom, 3 and 4 and 5, and right there, 6. Oh, didn't drop it on there. Okay, so that's really it. I'm just going to get out of there. But that's the idea, is that one pixel motion path is what's giving you that ability to reset an object. And then, of course, with the variable, combined with the variable, we can change the state or the visibility of the object based on a specific value. Isn't that a nifty little trick? Once again, the better you know your tools, the more you master your tools, the more possibilities you will unlock as you advance in your skills and take on, say, more complex projects. You'll find that your software doesn't always have the exact features you need to solve problems, but that's okay, because when you really know how to use your tools inside and out, you'll discover solutions like this or other solutions or workarounds that help you meet your project's needs. Real quick, before we dive into the next lesson, let me quickly share a few examples that demonstrate this technique, the power of this technique, and just some different ways that you can use this 0 pixel motion path. All right, let me pull these up. So this first example from Annabelle, probably one of the best uses of this technique that I've ever seen. So let me pull up her example right here. So you can see I kind of used just a little bit of it with the cube building, but in this case, you're guessing how much sugar is in each of these drinks. You can toggle through different drinks, and then you've got the sugar cube right here. Now, this was a clever technique. I didn't show this when I was doing my demo, is that she has a second one, a last one that's right there. So this is the motion path example, and then there's another example right here to show that there's always one more cube, which is actually a really smart approach for it. But again, you're just guessing here, and I think you can keep going pretty far, and then you can check your answer and then see exactly how many sugar cubes are in there. But you always have that extra one on the slide to show that there's another one that you can pull from. And this is the example that I shared earlier. You can download the source file, take a look at what's going on, but essentially the same idea, but just in a different context here for measuring a capacity. Then I thought this example from Ron always does some interesting things and comes up with some neat ideas. But in this example, he's using it for, there it is. All right, let me pull up the review. He's using it for a drag and drop return to get hints, audio hints from the SME or the expert. All right, so let's play this real quick. I think I have to click through a couple screens, but I thought this was a nice take for how this would work. So we have to get through the intro here. Okay, so you have this action plan. He's setting up the scenario right here. What I like is each of these markers lets you hear from different people. And to get advice on where to drop each of these markers, in the immediate, delayed, or the minor, you can drop them on the advice, the advice guy right here,
if not
and
breathing,
hear from them, and then it returns the marker back to the position.
In this case, this victim
So
has
each time I
significant
drop one of
burns on
these
large
characters
areas,
on there,
but is breathing well and has normal perfusion.
you get the
mental status is unimpaired,
feedback.
so you tag yellow and move on. Obviously injured.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's a really neat approach to have a multiple drop targets trigger audio that plays and then still have the items returned, so you don't have all the items
she becomes
on top
another of the
of
walking wounded. Tag green.
The advice or the drop target, wherever you're dropping those. Okay, so just a couple ideas for ways that you can use this technique. Hopefully you enjoyed it and find some ways that you can use this or a similar technique in your own e-learning projects. All right, in this lesson, we're going to take a look at a neat trick to reset only the incorrect choices in Storyline's drag and drop interactions. Now, you might be thinking, Dave, can I just use the standard try again feature? Well, sure you can, but here's the catch. It's going to leave all of the dragged items right where they are, correct or not. What we want to do is keep the good stuff from the default settings, so leave those in place, but add a little magic to it so that only the wrong answers will scoot back to their starting point. Now, how do we do that, you ask? Well, we're going to get a little help from Storyline's built-in drag and drop states and the zero motion path technique. So let me show you how this works. Okay, so I'm starting here in Storyline, and you know what? Let's do this real quick. I want to preview the default functionality, what you get out of the box, what you get when you first create that drag and drop. So this is a convert to freeform. You can see that up here under the insert. I just have the freeform question type. I've got my layers, my feedback for incorrect, and I've got 2 attempts, right? So 2 attempts down here. You can see the feedback correct and incorrect, and then 1 try again. You get a second attempt. And then I have a quiz result slide, and I included this because there is the option to reset the incorrect answers or questions. If you see the failure later right here, we have the option to show incorrect responses when reviewing, but that's not going to reset our questions, right? So when we reset the quiz, it's just going to reset everything back to normal. So I'll preview this real quick, just go through this, and then we'll look at the final version, kind of see what that looks like, and then we'll just put this together. So the default functionality is you make a choice, and then we will click submit. We get try again. If I would have gotten 1 correct, I click submit, continue, and then if I retry my quiz, everything just resets to the beginning. So that's not really what we want. What we want to do, I guess I should have previewed everything. So I'm going to preview it, and then I'll just show you the final version with the motion path and with the drop correct states and how we added those additional triggers to reset just the incorrect. And then what we can do here is just build this out. So let's say we'll get 1 correct, and then we'll miss the other 2. We click submit. And then notice how these now come back to that starting position. So if I were to get them correct this time, when I get correct, I get correct. And then my score still reflects all of the correct choices. So here's how this works. I'm just going to pull this up. We're going to practice. And a couple things we want to do to start this off. First, I want to just convert this to a drag and drop, because right now it's just a default slide. I just put some shapes on the slide. I have my own custom submit button, so we'll look at that as well on how we can wire that up. But I need to first make this into a graded question or freeform. So I'm going to come up to the Insert tab up here, and we'll choose Convert to Freeform. We have our 6 freeform question types. Drag and drop is what we want, so click OK. And all I need to do now is just assign my drag items. So I like to use a consistent naming prefix for my drag items and my drops. It makes it kind of easy to find these. So we'll say drag 1, drag 2, and drag 3. And then let's just assign drop 1 to drop 1, drop 3. Okay. And we'll give 2 attempts because we want to see that resetting of the position. So this part is set up correctly. We'll pop over to slide view and we'll just look at our slide. Okay, so a lot of the action that we're going to add, the trigger action, is going to happen on the try again, because it's that try again layer, and we get that try again because we added a second attempt. That's going to let us reset what we're doing. So the way it's going to work is when we get to the try again, we need to tell Storyline to reset the position of only the incorrect drop choices. So how do we know that? Well, we know that, come back to the base layer, because we can add states to we don't have to use variables, we can use states, the built-in states that tell us whether these actions are correct or incorrect. So let me show you. So if I select this first object and I come down to the states panel, edit states, and we'll create a new state. At the very bottom, hopefully you've seen these before, we have the drop correct and incorrect. So Storyline can visually tell us, or the learner, which items were dropped correctly or incorrectly. It's a nice way to give hints or clues without having the learner necessarily wait for submitting the interaction when it's too late to make a correct choice. So I'll say drop correct and choose add. And let's just format this, make this a little easier to identify. So let's make it green. And then we'll add a second drop state for the drop incorrect. So these are built in, which means all that functionality is associated automatically. It's already performed. You don't have to add any triggers for this. And we'll say this one can be the red. All right, so there are my 2. I'm going to click done. And then just to quickly add those to the remaining 2 drag objects, we can pop up to the home tab on the ribbon and use our best friend, the Format Painter. Double click it so we can use it twice without having to re-grab it. So click once, there's our 2, and then there's our 3. Okay, so now that that's set up, we have the state changes that will show when the submit button is clicked. If we want to preview that, we can see that real quick. So there's 2 options actually for that. You can have the colors change immediately. So the moment the objects are dropped on the incorrect target, we could see that visual feedback. I'll miss number 2 and 3. Right now, we don't see that change. It's not until we hit submit. Oh, submit, I haven't wired up this submit button. So this submit button, and you can see the color changes right there. So we actually do want to have that not happen as soon as they drop them on the slide, because if I set that up to not delay, well, what's going to happen is we're going to miss the opportunity to test out this resetting of the incorrect choices. Now, you may not want to provide the visual feedback to show which ones were correct or incorrect. See how it's immediately going to show me that, right? So we really probably wouldn't have to reset objects because the learner can figure out where each one of these would go. So I'm going to uncheck that. I'm going to keep the defaults. I'm going to check it, but keep it the default setting to delay. Now, if you didn't want to change you didn't want to show green or red or check mark or X, you can still use the same color. But what we want are these we want these built-in states so we can read and know which objects have been dropped correctly. So here comes the magic part. This is that 0 pixel technique. We want to replay the object. So we want to add an animation to these so that we can reset the position. So that's really what we're doing with the motion path, is we're going to reset the starting position of each object. So if I come up to the Animations tab and add a motion path and a line, right? It doesn't really matter. I can make it go off to the right or to the left. But let's just say, just to see how this would work, if I reset the motion path without changing the distance, let me show you what that's going to look like. So by default, you can see right here, this says the motion when the timeline starts on drag 1, move, move, move. We're going to delete that default. We're going to delete that default trigger. I'm going to come to the try again layer. And what I want to do is say, move the object. So drag 1 along motion path 1. I'll rename that to make that easier. When the timeline starts on this layer, let's say when the learner clicks try again, because that's when they're going to close the layer and they're going back to retry the quiz. But we do need an attempt. We want to say move it along that path only if that object, the drag 1, is not equal to the drop correct. So let's take a look at this real quick. We're evaluating the state. We're going to move it along the path if it's not drop correct. The reason we want to use the not equal to is because we have multiple drop targets. It could be on number 3, it could be on number 2, or depending on how many targets you have, you don't want to trigger for each one of those, right? So we'll say, as long as it's dropped anywhere and it's not drop correct, go ahead and move it along that motion path. Okay, now I'm going to come back to the base layer, and I haven't changed the length of this motion path because I want to show you what happens by default, and then we'll shorten that to 0 pixels so it doesn't ever go anywhere. But it's that resetting or that replaying of the motion path that lets that object return to its starting position. So I'm going to put this in the wrong position. I click submit. Oh, I still have to rewire that button. And then when I click try again, it's going to play that motion path. It moves it along that path. So we want to move it along the path, and guess what we'll do? We'll just change that path to 0 pixels so it doesn't go anywhere. And just to make it happen faster, it's always a good idea to change the duration to the shortest duration, which is 0.1, and that'll happen instantaneously. So preview again. So as soon as they click, the learner clicks that try again button to close the layer and go back to the base layer, everything that was incorrect is now automatic. You forget I haven't changed that button. It's back to its starting position right there. Okay, so I'm going to close out of here. Now let's rename this motion path. It's going to make it a lot easier for us to identify. So we'll just say this is drag 1 path. And what's really nice here, wait, I should be able to, okay. What I can also do is just copy this motion path and apply it to the remaining objects. So if I select the object, not the path, but the object, and under the animations tab, check this out. We've got the animation painter, just like we do the format painter. So I'm going to double click it, and I'm going to click once on item 2. And you can see I'll have to change the name up here, and then I'll click again on 3. All right, so get rid of that motion path, that animation painter, and we'll call this one drag 2, and then this one will be drag 3. Okay. All right, so let's head back to that try again layer, and we can just copy and paste that trigger that we have right here. Move. Well, I'm going to just put that above. It should be fine. Should make a difference here, but let's just keep the moves ahead of the hiding layer. So with this first trigger selected, I can copy it. So copy that selected trigger, and I'll paste it twice. And then let's say move drag object 2 along drag 2 if the state of drag 2 is not correct. And then we'll say drag 3 along drag 3 if the state of drag 03. And I'll just move the hide layer down here to the bottom. Okay, so let's take a look at this and see how it works this time. So preview. All right, so we'll get the first one correct. We'll miss the second 2. We'll click submit and try again. And now we have those nicely reset. Now we only have one attempt, so if we didn't get it correct, let's say we missed it again, right? Then that's just going to be it, and then we'd move on to the next slide, and it would show. So that's how you can reset objects or reset their position, in this case, the incorrect objects from a drag and drop interaction. All right, so I kept on hitting that submit button. Let's just change that trigger so we can have our own custom submit button. So we have the trigger right here for submit button. Just double click that, and then we can say submit interaction when user clicks the submit button. And now we just wired that. And if you don't see this, let's say you were doing something, you lost that button, you can always find that trigger here from the triggers. So somewhere down here, submit interaction. So you can always add that trigger manually to an object. So I forgot to change it. There we go. All right, so that's how you can also set up your own custom submit button. Okay, folks, there you have it. That's the nifty trick to reset just the wrong choices in Storyline's drag and drop interactions. Now, the secret is to combine that built-in functionality, use what Storyline already gives you for the drop correct states, and then combine that with that 0-pixel motion path trick. So remember, the drop correct states, they're not just about providing visual feedback to your learners, they're great for other things, since you can evaluate what's been dropped correctly or incorrectly. Hey, you did it. You've just wrapped up 6 ways to customize drag and drop interactions in Storyline 360. I hope you've enjoyed the ride, from playing around with animation effects to piecing together step-by-step interactions and even turning plain slides into something a little way more interactive. All right, now it's your turn to take the wheel. You can grab the practice files and just give one or more of those projects a go. And hey, if you hit a speed bump or just have a question, don't sweat it. You can pop over to the forums and throw Dave in the subject line, attention Dave, and I'll be there to help you out and figure out what's going on. Oh, and lastly, if you enjoyed the course or picked up something new, I'd really love to hear about that. You can send me a note at david@articulate.com or send me a DM on Twitter or X or mention me on LinkedIn telling me one thing you learned in the session. I always like hearing what you learned, what you got out of it. Plus, it lets me kind of see what you're working on. All right, thanks very much, everybody. We'll see you next time.